Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 10. Pula Arena. The Pula Arena is one of the most impressive amphitheaters ever built by the Roman Empire. It was constructed far from the Eternal City to the south in what is now Croatia. The Pula Arena was built in the 1st century AD, just years after the Roman Empire was established. Emperor Vespasian was the one behind the construction of the arena, the same guy who had the brilliant idea of creating the Colosseum in the heart of Rome. And yes, both arenas held bloody tournaments and savage combat. It was here in Croatia where gladiators fought to the death and knights held tournaments to see who was the better fighter. The Pula Arena is so important to Croatians, it's on their currency. It marked one of the most prosperous times for the region, even if it was just shy of 2,000 years ago. Because the town of Pula is situated right on the Mediterranean coast, it was an excellent place to receive goods from distant civilizations. There was also a modern road which led between Pula, Aquileia, and Rome. All that traffic with donkey caravans and brave adventurers moving to and fro, this city made a fortune, but the good times didn't last. The arena could originally hold 23,000 spectators and had a massive iron gate protecting them from the dangers on the arena floor. But by the time the Middle Ages rolled around, the arena was deserted. It was used by local farmers for grazing cattle. Only every now and then would the Knights of Malta show up and use the deserted amphitheater for a fair. Number 9. Tel Arod. Tel Arod is one of the most important biblical sites in Israel that still stands to this very day. It can be found west of the Dead Sea, near the modern city of Arad in an area hemmed by tall, dusty mountain peaks. The ancient city began as a small settlement about 6,000 years ago during the Copper Age. Then, in the Bronze Age, around 3500 BC, the Canaanite civilization established their city here. The original city probably had no more than 2,500 residents. Tel Arod thrived in the center of a trading route for just over 1,500 years before the Israelites attacked and defeated the Canaanites. The Canaanites were kicked out of their ancestral home, and the Israelites continued to prosper there. But the Israelites weren't the only ones who liked the city. Between the 9th and 6th centuries BC, Tel Arod was decimated no less than 6 times. It was destroyed in 701 BC by the Assyrians and in 587 BC by the Babylonians. Despite all the damage, all the pillaging, and all the violence, the city's foundations are still strong. Researchers believe this is because the Canaanites used natural materials for the construction of their buildings. They used local stone and earth to construct the most naturalistic city possible, which has allowed it to withstand 5,000 years of brutal punishment by the desert. The city was such an important place to the Israelites that it could be found in various books of the Bible. The book of Numbers discusses the attack on the Israelites by King Arad as they made their way to the Promised Land, something that may or may not have happened. And in the book of Judges, there is a story about how the descendants of Moses' father-in-law settled in Arad. And now for number 8. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Tazilla Simon in Canada and David Bratcher. Thank you so much for the super thanks and for spending time with us. We really appreciate your donations. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 8. The Torreon. One of the oldest modern buildings in New Mexico is a stone fortification built by Hispanic settlers in the 1840s or 1850s. The tower, called the Torreon, was built before the United States was a country. This was just before the Lincoln County War of 1878 to 1881. It was during that war that Billy the Kid walked into the local courthouse in the town of Lincoln, murdered 2 deputies, then rode away on a stolen horse. These were the days of the Wild West, and the Torreon is one of the few remaining monuments of that period in American history. The town of Lincoln is as close as you can get to a snapshot of the 1800s. The original courthouse is still standing, and so too is the jail. Lincoln has been called the most authentic Wild West town in the United States. But even before this old western town became the epicenter of a bloody battle, the Torreon stood as a defensive tower. Have you ever been to a Wild West town before? Let me know in the comments. Number 7. Mistress. The ancient city of Mistress was where the very last emperor of the Byzantine Empire was crowned, Emperor Constantine XI, in 1443 AD. Today, it stands abandoned on the slopes of the majestic Taygetus Mountains in Sparta, Greece. This fantastic deserted city still commands unparalleled views of the Laconian plain, the place where Spartan warriors thrived over 2,000 years ago. The highest point of the city is the fortress of Vilharduin, named after the prince of Achaia. Achaia was a crusader state controlled by the Holy Roman Empire after the end of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. During the 14th and 15th centuries, the mountain town experienced a great spell of prosperity. Culture flourished, the city attracted thinkers and scientists, and artists flooded the streets. During the Ottoman period, travelers in the region mistook the city of Mistress for being the capital of ancient Sparta. After the village was abandoned in the 1830s, a new town was built nearby and named Sparti, keeping the legend of the Spartans alive, even though they had nothing to do with Mistress. The city only came about because of the original fortress built in the 13th century. These days, Mistress still stands. It was introduced as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1989. Even the great Pantanasa Monastery is still standing in extraordinary detail. Number 6. Castillo de San Marcos. The Castillo de San Marcos is the oldest surviving masonry fort in the continental United States. It was built on the western shore of the Matanzas Bay in Florida by Spanish engineer Ignacio Daza almost 400 years ago. The city of St. Augustine, where the fort stands, was founded in the 15th century by conquistador Pedro Menéndez de Aviles. Originally, Florida was part of the Spanish Empire. What a lot of people don't realize is just how much of the United States belonged to places like Spain and France. After the English raided St. Augustine in 1668, the local Spanish governor demanded a fort be built to protect the rest of Florida. The first stones were laid in 1672, and the fortress was finished 2 decades later. True, it underwent several alterations over the following decades, but the fortress is still largely original. The Castillo de San Marcos has a very dark history. The construction in the 17th century was almost entirely thanks to slaves owned by the Spanish. But shortly after its construction, Spain began to change their views on slavery. The fortress became a point of entry for fugitive slaves escaping British-controlled North America. Slaves ran from the British, arrived in Florida, and the Spanish freed them. This resulted in some of the first freed black settlements in what would soon become the United States. Number 5. The Marisha Caves. Bet Guvrin Marisha is a massive archaeological park encompassing a handful of ancient sites, including a crusader fortress and subterranean nightmare. The whole region was initially part of an Iron Age settlement called Marisha, which became one of the first cities of the Kingdom of Judah during the days of the First Temple. That was between the 10th and 6th centuries BC. It continued to be occupied by Judeans until the conquest of Alexander the Great around 330 BC. Marisha was then occupied by the Greeks, primarily by retired Greek soldiers leaving Alexander's army. It was later conquered by the Sidonians, the Nabateans, and later the Greeks again, before being destroyed in 40 BC by the Parthians. What's truly amazing about Marisha and the surrounding area is that underneath the surface is a hidden labyrinth of subterranean caves. There are over 500 caves, 3,500 rooms, and almost 800 acres of tunnels. The caves form a serpentine maze, a labyrinth of tombs, storage chambers, burials, and even pens for farm animals. It's not clear why such a vast network of underground rooms was built, but it could have had something to do with trying to avoid foreign invaders. Most of the caves were carved between the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, shortly after Marisha was taken by Alexander. With all the war happening, the locals likely dug an underground city to try and hide themselves in case they were conquered again. All these years later, you could still shelter a small city inside the underground passages, which have barely aged at all. Would you like to explore the Marisha Caves? I would. Number 4. Panamnagar. Panamnagar is an abandoned city in Bangladesh that once prospered as a wealthy town of Hindu merchants, but its history is a little complex. The city was first occupied around the 13th century and went under the name of Sonargaon. The area was entirely controlled by the Muslims who governed over the Sultanate of Bengal starting in 1338. But then, 300 years later, the Mughal Empire showed up and decimated the Muslims who had been in control. And that was when Sonargaon and other nearby cities started to flourish. The Mughals connected the main metropolis to other settlements by constructing extensive highway systems, carving out long canals, and building bridges. Many of these highways and bridges still exist today. In the 19th century, Sonargaon became a bustling trading center. This was during the English occupation when colonial powers were extracting as many goods as they could get their hands on, primarily cotton fabrics. There were over 1,400 families of weavers living in and around the city, selling their wares to the British East India Company. When a group of wealthy Hindu merchants returned to their homeland from Kolkata after being away, they built a small township over the ruins of the earlier Sonargaon. They then changed the name to Panamnagar, and that's what the place is known as today. The wealthy Hindu merchants lived in the small neighborhood and continued to prosper until around the end of the Second World War. In 1947, race riots caused the city to be deserted. Panamnagar and the medieval ruins of Sonargaon are still deserted to this very day, yet they still stand strong. Number 3. Tower of Hercules. The Tower of Hercules has been standing proudly at the entrance of La Coruña harbor in northwestern Spain since at least the 1st century. The Romans originally built the tower as a lighthouse to show where the entrance to the harbor was. Makes sense. It was built on a massive rock rising 150 feet from the turbulent sea. The tower itself then rises another 150 feet into the sky. It is officially the oldest surviving lighthouse on the planet, looking so new you might think it was built a few decades ago. But not all of the tower was built by the Romans. The true origin of the structure is a mystery. Some archaeologists say Emperor Trajan built the lighthouse on the foundations of a much earlier lighthouse constructed by the Phoenicians hundreds of years earlier. Others suggest it may have copied the original plans of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. It's all extremely mysterious, which makes the monument that much more exciting. The reason the lighthouse is in such good shape is because it underwent renovations in the 18th century. Architect Eustachio Gianni modified the Roman foundation and added 60 additional feet to the structure. It's only because of his work that the Tower of Hercules looks so new and fresh, even though it's 2,000 years old. Number 2. Changiyu. The Changiyu astronomical complex was built 2,250 years ago on the northern coast of Peru. Scientists believe it functioned as a giant desert calendar, using the sun to identify the days and weeks of the year. The site includes several major pieces of architecture that are still standing to this day. There's the hilltop complex of the fortified temple, the observatory and the administrative center, and 13 viewing towers positioned on the ridgeline. The entire complex was dedicated to watching the sky and understanding the movement of celestial objects. It may very well have been one of the greatest astronomical centers anywhere in the world. But who were the brilliant astronomers studying the cosmos here? According to UNESCO World Heritage, the ceremonial center was likely dedicated to a solar cult. In other words, there was a group of dedicated astronomers who lived here full-time and kept their eyes on the sky. It's a fascinating place because it's in the middle of the desert. This is a wasteland, somewhere you would never expect anyone to live. Never mind build an ancient observatory. The 13 viewing towers are still visible like spines on the back of a giant sand dune. As for the culture responsible for Changiyu, that was likely the Casma Sachin culture. They prospered in the dry and arid coastline from between 3600 and 200 BC. That is a huge amount of time for a single culture to live in the same place. Archaeologists say the Casma Sachin culture may have formed from the remnants of the even older Caral Supe civilization, still considered the oldest advanced civilization to live in the Americas. Number 1. The Roman Forum. The Roman Forum is kind of still standing. It had to be excavated because it was in ruins and buried underneath the city of Rome, but it was eventually put back together, or rather, some parts of it were put back together. The Forum was rediscovered by Carlo Fea in 1803, with excavations taking over 100 years. It wouldn't be fully revealed until a century later, but even after so long being destroyed and buried under rubble, the Roman Forum still stood with enough intact fragments that modern However, archaeologists were able to put a lot of it back together again. Visitors can view the partially reconstructed Roman Forum today, getting a pretty good idea of what it originally looked like 2,500 years ago. Have you ever been there? Let me know in the comments. But what was the Roman Forum? It was originally built in the center of the historic city of Rome around 500 BC. It was an open-air meeting area where members of Roman society held public meetings regarding all things religious, political, and social. Historians believe it was right here in the shadow of the Forum's pillars that the Roman Republic was founded. Many people call it the birthplace of democracy. The Forum remained the meeting place for the members of the Republic until the overcrowding started. By the time Julius Caesar showed up 500 years later, Rome was too busy. They couldn't fit all the important members of the Senate inside the Forum. Caesar had to build a new government building, leaving the old one to be slowly buried under Rome as it grew into an empire. Thanks for watching! Which of these incredible ancient places would you like to visit? Or have you already? Let us all know in the comments below. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!